I would like to share with you what I consider to be an inner map that facilitates the understanding of the inner work for one's own evolution. Why do I consider a map so important? Because according to my experience, without it, we are lost as on the road without a navigator in an unknown land. And in the field of personal and spiritual growth, it is very common to speak about higher self, about the soul, the ego, etc. But we cannot very clearly identify them in us. It remains always a bit too vague and does not help our inner navigation. On the contrary, at times it makes us lose our way and we feel blocked or limited in our path. Someone asks us what the soul is. At best, we can explain it in words, but how can we identify it in action or in a feeling within us? How can we make it real to our awareness so that it is more concrete? So let's say solid. This is a crucial point because as long as an idea remains only a belief or a faith in the truth, or perhaps a sort of an intuition, but we fail to see it and use it with awareness in physical reality, it remains only a belief or an intuition without the strength to transform us, to heal our wounds and to eliminate our problems or transform them. I mean, think about it. How much could we benefit in our spiritual growth with practical awareness of our soul, or, for example, of true self? So, what are they? Where are they in us? How do they manifest themselves in our daily life? Don't you think that knowing this would help in your own healing and evolution? I'm quite sure it would. So, before going briefly into this map of our inner world, let's keep in mind that this is not the only map or way of interpreting the inner world, but in my 20 years of experience, it is the most useful, quick and complete way I found to heal from our past at all levels and dimensions to advance on a path. And it's also the easiest to understand in my experience. So I really hope it becomes a useful tool for your spiritual journey. Now, another important point is to be aware that we are inhabited by many parts. And there's not only the I, or what by name is, for example, our mind and our emotions. We are actually a large, crowded condominium with various parts. But unfortunately, a poorly managed condominium is, often chaotic, anarchic, where the parts frequently or sometimes do whatever they want with impulsiveness, creating many headaches in our life because we are not aware of what is really going on inside of us, at least not all the time. It is as if we lived in a house without being aware of 50% or more of the existing rooms, which obviously become in time dirty, smelly, and they can create discomfort in the whole house. So I believe we need an organizational model to copy from, and this organization model that we should take is an example that we can see in our solar system with our sun, which is the bearer of our life and light. It's in the center, and the other planets around that sun can develop and welcome life thanks to the sun's harmonic and cyclic orbit, up to their cyclic and harmonic orbit around the sun. So if the sun were not firm in the center, there would be chaos, disorder, with no solidity or points of reference, and life on Earth would not be possible. The sun is represented, in this case, by our true self, or who we are, which should be at the center of our life, of our identity, because the self knows all of the rooms of our house. And therefore, all the other parts circulate around it. Instead, we are centered on an ego. An ego that does not have the power and functions of a true self. It ignores a lot of rooms in the house. And here's why humanity, according to me, is in a lot of confusion and pain. Putting the sun or our higher self at the center within us is the only way to put each part in ourselves in its place, and thus creating harmony. So this map is intended to help us gradually achieve this goal, as well as healing our wounded parts, which is critical to realizing our essence. Okay, so now I would like to present an inner map with all the potentially involved parties for a complete healing or for an increased awareness of who we are or how we function. Also, I'll be entering some into their interpretation and awareness, with the exception of their practical management. Let us not, just a note here, let us not be fooled by, perhaps a simple appearance of the map, or for example by the thought, oh, okay, I know these parts, I know all of them, nothing new for me, because the key is in their correct placement within us and learning to perceive and feel how they operate, and above all, how to manage them. And this is what I teach in this document you can download in my website, www.nataliash.com. In the map, there also are not all the existent parts because, for example, each cell could be also identified as a part because it has its own awareness. So also, for example, the liver could be a part, the stomach could be another part, etc. And then there are also all the various parts that represent our age in the past. So it's such as the adolescent part, when we were a kid, we were a teenager, the part that has experimented a certain trauma at a certain age. All this exists, and probably much more, many more parts. But to heal using this map, I didn't find them so vital. And to simplify work, I have included only the essential parts that really make the difference. So here is our list of all the parts of the inner map. It's the self, we have the soul, the non-beneficial energies, the ego, the mind, the inner child, the visceral part, and the body. Now let's see each part separately. The goal was, we said, to be able to identify these parts in our daily life so that we can have more knowledge, more power, more advantages. So let's start with the self. The word that most closely resembles its real meaning that we can, understand is awareness. Self is awareness. It's being aware of what is happening inside of us. Now, the way to activate the self in the beginning is by, studying, reading books, going to seminars, learning all the arguments connected to spirituality. That's a way where you increase your knowledge, your knowing. Now, be careful here. I can also say, oh yeah, I've done all that. I know this, and this. Yes, we do. It's true. However, what's the difference between the knowing of the self and the knowing of the ego? Because the ego also says, I know this, I, and I. I know everything. The more I know, the better, the stronger I feel. Especially the superior I feel. Now that's an identification problem, which is basically what avoids us to recognize who we are, the self, which is also knowing. But here the knowing is without becoming identified with the knowing. Here you identified, and that's when we lose ourselves. So, the self is being aware without identifying in all that it knows. Okay? So it's sort of being here and now, being aware of everything, also of the thoughts and of all the parts, but not identifying in them. That's how you get to the self, but it's not the only way. Another very important way to make emerge this part is by sacrificing the parts of the ego in which we are identified. So ego is identified with lots of parts of hurt, right? Of trauma, all the negative stuff, let's say. More we use the ego, that means we sacrifice the parts, we disidentify, so we recognize that we're not this and we're not that. And when we do that, we let go of it. Letting go is like throwing dried branches of a tree, let's call this ego stuff, to the fire, which fires and lightens up the self. So we need this material, the ego, to lighten up the self. And we do this through disidentification. So an example would be when we are so angry with somebody, instead of identifying that anger, we take responsibility of that action. It's our issue, something we already have lived before before living it now with the person with whom we are angry with. Taking responsibility and, letting go, forgiving, and all of that healing process is to be done. And that's when you release, you lose power here, and you give it to who you are, to the switch of power here, every time you do that. So the self is something that you become aware by working on, increasing yourself, your awareness. I hope, like, for example, that this inner map will increase a bit your awareness too, and that will help you be more aware of who you are, because you are more aware of all the parts that are inside of us, right? And also through being here and now, we get that with disidentifying from the thoughts and all of that who we are not, and by healing the ego, that means healing all of these other parts, the mind, inner child, the visceral part. Okay, so that is how we get to the self, because the self is represented by the sun. So the sun is the star that emits light, emits heat, emits love. And that love and all that knowledge within it goes and creates life. That's where it goes to the soul. Soul is full of seeds of all of our passions, talents, all the knowledge we have accumulated in our previous lives too. When with this light, our soul can grow, expand, and express itself. So the self is also known by loving, but not the same love as loving our children or our parents. That is also part of the self, but it's more specifically soul usually. The self is more unconditional love. It's a universal love. It's Christ love of the higher self. So it loves everything. It's everywhere. And that's why the self is the only of all these parts that we cannot identify in a specific part in our body or in our energy field. It's everywhere. When the self is present, you feel it everywhere. You are the self, okay? And when you increase experience and awareness, what starts to happen, that's a way that you recognize it, is when you start talking from a source that you usually don't talk from. It's just something that flows naturally, and there is a wisdom in it. There is a knowing in it. There is a love, there's peace, there's harmony in what you're saying, how you're feeling, how you're making feel others too. That is when the self starts to, express itself. So to get there, you need to unconditionally love. How do you do that? Letting go of the ego, letting go of the hurt, being present, that means disidentifying from the thoughts and all that what we are not, the body, thoughts, emotions, and increasing our awareness without identifying it with the ego. So these are all things that we increase awareness. So awareness is the self. So I hope that will help now. Okay? Let's see the soul. The soul, if the self is the masculine part, the male part, which, activates the seeds in the soul is the female part. And the soul, we can define it, the closest word or wording I can find is profound feeling. Now, feeling, we feel also with the inner child, so be careful not to confuse these. What's the difference? The inner child are more superficial, if I may, emotions. They have more movement, they're more close to this material reality, okay? And they also have a more, how I can say, immediate effect, a stronger effect. It's easier to recognize them. These are more connected to they're very profound, yes. They have a strong effect on ourselves, yes, also. But it's more, slightly more, it gets more in the realm of a bit of an intuition. But still, it's a feeling, okay? And many times, and it's happened to me for many years, I was confusing inner child with the soul with inner child. So many times, the soul can be depression, being sad, okay? A typical feeling of the soul is feeling nostalgia, missing home, true home, which is the home of the self. Because the soul, what the soul wants is to reunite itself with the self, because the soul has detached, let's say, in this game, which is a life, has detached from the self in order to make experiences and get back home again. And this is the game we are all playing, right? Evolution. So in order to get back, what does the soul need? So if it's profound feeling, what it needs is to express what it has, what it feels inside. It needs to express its talents. All our talents are in here. You know, our passions, what we've learned from our past lives is in here. So we must find a way to feel this part and start to express it. How can we help to do that? Now, there is a healing method that really helps you to feel the soul and make it expand and being more full. Because what happens? The soul, in various lifetimes and in this lifetime, it gets reduced because of trauma, which can be emotional, psychological, physical. And every time this happens, parts of our souls go away most of the time. In other dimensions, we lose soul parts. They're also called fragmented parts. So instead of being here, let's say me, Aliash, instead of living my life with 100% of my soul energy, my soul power, I am maybe here just 70% or 80 or 50. What does that mean? That I don't have available all that I am here, that I've accumulated with all my experiences, so I am not so able to express who I am in this lifetime because many parts are missing. So the healing method to heal this is called, soul retrieval. You retrieve soul parts back. And why is that so important? It's not just because you become more fully who you are, so you feel more profoundly who you are, okay? That helps, healing the soul, becoming and recognizing it. But also, what happens when we lose soul parts, that empty part never remains empty. Usually it gets filled up by non-beneficial energies that are mostly entities. But we'll talk about that later, okay? So those entities a lot of them are negative, and they do not do us a good service in getting back to the self. By getting back all of the lost parts, the soul fragmented parts, because it's the soul's birthright to be inside of this body, when they get back to us, they push out the non-beneficial energies. Okay? And we are able to feel more ourselves and be more, express more, be more happy, feel more talent, feel more intuition, have the more capacity of problem solving, and everything flows better. soul. We need to heal the soul. The self does not need healing. The self just wants to be known, recognized, so that it can transform and, let's say, bring home or bring integrity to all the other parts. The soul already, like all the other parts, okay, some like, well, this the MBE, we'll see now, you just need to eliminate it. But all of the others need healing. Also the soul. This is a very, very important part that is most of the time neglected. So remember that the soul is profound feeling, is the female part of this spiritual part of us, okay? And we in order to recognize it, we need to listen to us and recognize the difference between soul feeling and inner child feeling and visceral feeling. Okay, we'll see the differences now. So that you know, okay, the soul, what's it doing? What are these characteristics of the soul? The soul, we can also, to help us understand, is represented as the princess in the Disney films, the old Disney films, okay? Because that's the soul part, the female part, waiting in a castle, right? Which is the ego, the dragon, the bad guys, who are keeping the soul trapped with all the parts, with the MBEs. And the self is the prince, right? With the truth, with his light, with love. He has the power to kill the ego. In reality, we see we do not kill him, we transform him, we purify him, and they merge. He merges with the soul. The soul is trying to, its goal is to merge back with the soul, the self, to come back home. So to do that, it needs to express itself, feel whole, and all the rest of the parts need to be sufficiently healed, and this opens up the doors to the self, but with our awareness. We need to increase awareness, okay? So, let's go now to the non-beneficial energies. The non-beneficial energies is what the closest thing I can resemble it. It's like to the pain body of Eckhart Tolle, but it's much more in my case, because it's also not only the unresolved emotions and pain and all that trauma, it is also all of the energies that are not ours. That means entities. Now, entities are also life forms that are beneficial for us. So it's not all negative, okay? So don't see it as something very negative. Basically, the important point is that we have a lot of beings in our body, in our mind, in our energy body, which are not ours. That's very important to be aware of, because the most parts of our thoughts, especially in the beginning of our spiritual growth at the beginning, or those who are not yet awakened, almost all of the thoughts we have are not ours, or from other beings, because we have hundreds of them inside of us, and it's normal. It's as life works. There is no empty space. Everything's being used, and these beings have their reason to be there, okay? Now, so this is very important, because if we want to heal the ego and allow the self to come in, we cannot be full of other beings, right? So we have to get rid of these. Now, the good news is you don't have to directly work on this, which is what most people don't want to do. But the main part, the easiest way and the nicest way, is to call back the soul, the fragmented parts of the soul. And when these come in, they push out automatically these entities. And you have a benefit with the ego, which is less stronger. You have a healing of the mind, healing of the inner child, and of the visceral parts too. So it's very important, this duo here, very important, and that's why you will find a free document to download in my website, www.nataliage.com, where in the practice I show you the basic methods how to do that, especially with the soul, okay? So these non-beneficial energies are the cause of most of our difficulties in life. So it's important to at least take into consideration. And we must then work on the soul to purify this part. Okay? So let's go now to the mind directly, and we'll go to the ego at the end. The mind, well, is the most known part, thanks also to all the work of psychology. It's the part of us that needs always to solve something. It needs food for thought, let's say, right? You have to have a goal. The mind cannot be just let loose without any sort of indication. So from one part, we need to give something to do to the mind. On the other, we have to learn how to turn it off, if I can say. Okay, not being identified with it. So it has to become a tool. If we don't make it a tool, it means automatically we are identified with it and we are in the ego and not in the self. So if I have a belief that I am the thought and I am identified in many thoughts, the more I identify in the thoughts, the farther I am in being myself, and that the self doesn't have the space inside of me to express itself. So we need to learn through meditation, being aware, to let go of the mind and all of the ideas we have about us, about the world, that are damaging us and that are keeping us in identification in who we are, which is ego, which is not helping us. So I wouldn't say much more about the thoughts. It's fairly, it's a lot. We can do that, and you can talk about these parts a lot more, of course. But I think it's the basic. We all know about the mind, right? So the important part is that it has to become a tool. Okay, the mind is very powerful, but it has to be under the control, if I can say, of the self, not of the ego. Inner child. Now, the inner child is the most emotional part. Is the feelings. We feel it inside the belly usually, or in this point. Okay, the soul is something we can identify, or in the heart, also in the body part where the inner child is. And the inner child is all of the emotions from our youth, when we were a small kid. And this is important to heal. Of course it is. It's what all the psychotherapies does and all the energy healing does. But there is an important part we have to learn ourselves. And we need to get rid of being emotionally, how do you say, we have to be capable of recognizing our emotions. So asking every day ourselves, what do I feel? You know, what do I feel here? What emotion? Do I feel sadness? Do I feel anger? Do I feel happiness? Do I feel fear? Do I feel impotence? Whatever. We need to recognize this inner child in order to heal it, because while we recognize it, only then we can comprehend it, and then we can accept it, and then let it go. It's a whole healing process, but it starts by recognizing what we are feeling. So recognizing is a key thing here. Of course, again, not identifying in our emotion, it's just a part of us, okay? And we have to learn how to not confuse them with the soul and not with the visceral part, which now we'll talk about. So the visceral part, you seeing I'm talking less about these parts because they're more known than self and soul, okay? The visceral part is the part that's also, in my experience at least, I've always seen it connected, intertwined with the emotional, with the inner child. It's in the same place in the body, maybe slightly lower. And it's the instinctual parts. All of our instincts are here. That means power, wanting, territory is here. Sexuality, the instinctual part of sexuality. From here comes out envy, comes out jealousy, wanting stuff. This is very important also to recognize, and that it has to be also, it has to flow throughly, not be compressed, because being this suppressed, is the main issue with not feeling low self-esteem. There's no real drive in our life. And most importantly, it blocks the whole process until the self, because if this part is blocked, we cannot be truly eradicated, having our roots in our body, that means in earth. There is no grounding without the healing of this part, or it's a limited grounding. So again, here, to heal this, you need to recognize it, and then when you recognize what these parts are, live them to a certain extent, okay? Doesn't mean now you have to be jealous, you have to be aggressive, or you have to be whatever. Just means that you have to recognize them and let them flow. And if they are suppressed, you need to do some practices, like boxing, for example, not only, which lets them flow through you, okay? This is different for every person, but it's an important part, okay? So, the last one here is the body. Now, the body is also very known. It's something we can feel and touch and see. The body also has its language. Now, the body, in order to apprehend its language, the most easy one is, you ask the body, what do you want to eat today? And the body talks to you, right? Now, that's correct, but in order for the body to really clearly talk to you, it needs to be detoxed, purified, because if it's not purified, you risk listening to the part of the inner child or the mind, whatever, who wants food, which is not what the body really wants. So in order to get a good communication with the body, it needs to be detoxed. So it means good nutrition. So here you need, fresh juices every day, especially vegetable juices, and limiting certain foods. I won't talk about this because everybody knows it's the same thing, not drinking and eating those goodies, the good stuff. But basically, the body is a part that supports all of the rest, of course. The body basically is the self, because it's self that is producing the body. It's creating it all the time. But it want to get in, and to get in, it has to be detoxed at least at a minimum level. If not, we cannot. The self is such a high vibration, it cannot be too much incarnated, if I can say, or lowered inside the body. It never will be all the time inside, because the body cannot handle all that high vibration. But we at least have to help as much as possible and higher the vibration of the body through detox and good nutrition. Okay, the body also can talk to us and give us other information, which can be also useful for our health, okay? Anyway, the important thing is detox the body. So now, let's wrap this a bit up and let's go back to the ego. Now, what is the ego? Oh, what is the ego? Ego, usually we say, is the false self. Okay, well, what does that really mean? So if I ask you, where are you? What do you respond? Where are you here? Where do you identify that you are right now, listening to this video? The ego is the sum of all of the parts you're identified in right now. That means, if you are mostly identified in a non-healed ego, which is full of non-beneficial energies, mind thoughts out of control, unhealed emotions, visceral parts also unhealed, suppressed, etc., and many toxins in the body, the sum of your thoughts and all that you're identified is what you are, and will be a quite unhappy way of living. On the other hand, if most of your identification is in the self and in the soul, your ego will be totally different, but it will be purified. It won't be eliminated, it will be purified. What does that mean? It means that the ego, the mission of the ego, the use of the ego is to become like a purified lens, free most of the time of all of the negative load, emotional load, energy load, which is not useful for your evolution, so that the ego becomes a interface between the self, soul, and with the body and mind and all the reality we have here in planet Earth. So the ego is who we really are at the end, let's say, right here in this realm, because we identify constantly in the ego. We cannot not be the ego. Right now I am talking with the ego too. But it depends on the quality of the ego. Is how much is the ego identified in these parts? Is it more in the uppermost part or more in the down part? So we don't get rid of the ego. It gets purified. And when it gets purified, that is when, in my opinion, ego is sometimes written with a big letter E, because it becomes the mirror of the higher self, who we really are. And that's when we identify with the self. We move through identification to the self and back, but we're mostly here and not so much here. But the ego, when it's purified, can move wherever it wants. It has a tool. The tool becomes, mind becomes a tool for the ego with a big E, okay? Of the inner child, the visceral part, whatever part you have, it's a tool. And it becomes identified much more easily by the self, which can come down, express itself, let's lower in our consciousness, come inside through us, and we can then express and emit the light that we are, the love that we are, the Christ that we are. Okay? So I hope that this was very helpful for you, or at least somewhat helpful. If you're interested in the practical part of healing and dealing with the non-beneficial energies and the soul, you can do that by going to a website, nataliage.com. You'll find the menu written Inner Map, and there you put your email and you can download the document where you can learn for free the basic methods to do that. Okay? So, thanks for listening, and see you soon.